Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome to the Mansouri Show. I'm your host, Arif Zafar Mansouri, and today I have the privilege of visiting with the Ambassador Dr. S. Akbar Ahmed at his home in Bethesda near Washington, D.C. Dr. Ahmed is Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University in Washington, D.C. He's a global fellow of Wilson Center. He is also a former High Commissioner of Pakistan to United Kingdom and Ireland. His career, the life and career is just incredibly inspiring for the Pakistani community and the Muslim community, and it's certainly an honor to host, a scholar and a diplomat whose life's work has been about connecting the communities, the cultures, and the generations. So, first of all, Dr. Ahmed, I'd like to welcome you to the Mansouri Show.
Thank you so much, Arif Bhai. It's a great honor for me. I'm a big fan of the Mansouri Show, like I'm a big fan of the Arif Mansouri personality. You've been such a great leader, such an inspiration for us. So I'm really honored and delighted, and thank you for that very warm introduction.
Thank you so much. It's so very kind of you. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to share this short video about the life and journey of Dr. Ahmed. So let's watch it together.
From the historic city of Allahabad in 1943 to the highest intellectual and diplomatic circles of the modern world, the life of Dr. Akbar Salahuddin Ahmed is a remarkable journey of scholarship, service, and global influence. Raised in Pakistan and educated at some of the world's most prestigious institutions, Dr. Ahmed studied at Cambridge and earned his doctorate in anthropology from the University of London. He entered the civil service of Pakistan in the 1960s, serving in some of the most complex and sensitive regions, including Waziristan and Baluchistan, experiences that would later shape his profound understanding of tribal societies, identity, and power.
This is a bit like Christmas in the Christian world. We are in Cairo and we are celebrating the birthday of our holy prophet.
For Muslims like me, Islam is more than a religion. It is a whole way of life.
From administration to diplomacy, he rose to serve as Pakistan's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland, one of the most significant diplomatic assignments in the country's history. And then came academia, and the world took notice. Dr. Ahmed has held distinguished appointments at Harvard, Princeton, and Cambridge. He served as the first Distinguished Chair of Middle East and Islamic Studies at the U.S. Naval Academy and is a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Since 2001, he has held what is widely regarded as one of the most prestigious chairs of its kind, the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University in Washington, D.C., where he also serves as a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. His pen has been as powerful as his podium. He is the author of more than a dozen influential and award-winning books on contemporary Islam, including the celebrated Brookings Quartet, Journey into Islam, Journey into America, The Thistle and the Drone, and Journey into Europe, works that have reshaped how scholars and policymakers understand the relationship between the Muslim world and the West. And then there is the screen. He presented and narrated the landmark BBC television series Living Islam. He produced the feature film Jinnah, starring the legendary Christopher Lee.
Most academics can only dream of.
Mr. Jinnah for Pakistanis is like Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin rolled into one.
It led to a film on Jinnah, where Jinnah was played by the late, great Christopher Lee.
He founded Pakistan, and I played him in this film. And I know it's the best thing I've ever done.
His plays, Noor and The Trial of Dara Shirko, have been staged across the world, bringing history, faith, and identity to life for global audiences. The tributes paid to this man speak volumes. The BBC has described him as the world's leading authority on contemporary Islam. Former Archbishop of Canterbury Lord Rowan Williams called him perhaps the most distinguished and versatile Muslim scholar in the English-speaking world today. And the eminent historian Professor Stanley Walpert declared, Akbar Ahmed is the greatest scholar of Islam in America and the world. Nobody else stands so high. He is the Dara Shurko of our time. His influence extends far beyond academia. He has advised global leaders, engaged with presidents, appeared on major international platforms including The Oprah Winfrey Show, and has been honored in rare and historic ways, including a dedicated service at the National Cathedral in Washington.
We need understanding, we need ideas, and we look to you.
The exercise to understand the Muslim world is not a luxury for the United States. It is an absolute imperative.
We need to read more about each other, Muslims and non-Muslims, visit our houses of worship, visit homes, make friends, everything we can do to try to have some mutual comprehension.
The plane slammed into the Pentagon, which is just a few miles from my university. And from that day onwards, I sort of committed myself. I said, I commit myself now to promoting interfaith understanding. I literally haven't rested one 24-hour period. It's been non-stop. White House, State Department, Pentagon, think tanks, universities, talking to students, journalists. And I find that the faster I run, the more I'm needed to run faster, because there are so many misunderstandings constantly being created, gaps constantly being opened up.
No Sharia in America! You're trying to kill him! And one day, all Islam will be scoured off of the earth.
Anderson, I want you to ask yourself this question. I'm sure your mathematics is better than mine. If every Muslim in the United States of America, which is about 2% of the population, wanted Sharia, which is not the case at all, even if they wanted it, could they impose it over a population of 98% who are not Muslim in a democracy?
Program with you and the father of the murdered journalist Daniel Pearl, Judea Pearl. Well, this made a huge impact.
I would just like to commend the good doctor for his wonderful work in helping to change the mindset of not only Americans but citizens of the world.
You devote your life, that you put yourself into this hardship of traveling around, and I know what it means. I cannot think of more warm feelings than I have towards your work and the work of, I think it's wonderful that you have another generation following up. So,
America's all these people. Thank you for speaking to us here at the BBC News.
Journey into America, the challenge of Islam, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everything should remind us of the glory, of the wonder of life on earth. Everyone, it's not Jewish, not Muslim, not Christian, not atheist, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, a diplomat, an anthropologist, a filmmaker, a poet, a bridge builder between civilizations, and one of the most consequential Muslim voices of our time. Please join us in welcoming our distinguished guest, Ambassador Dr. Akbar Salahuddin Ahmed.
Dr. Ahmed, you were born in Allahabad, and your family settled in Karachi after the partition, and you studied in Ahmedabad. So what were some of those early life experiences in your formative years, in your home, in school or in your community, that first sparked that passion for the community service or public service and scholarship?
I think I often ask myself that question, and I think it was the trauma of living through, because I was born in 1943, right before partition itself. And my father was a senior civil servant in the British Raj, and like people in the civil service structure, he was offered a choice. You had to opt for either India or opt for Pakistan, and he opted for Pakistan. So literally we all packed up and we left at the height of the division in August 1947. And we arrived in Karachi, and he was appointed to a very senior post. He was in charge of the railways in Karachi, which was the capital of Pakistan. And he had the very important task of moving not only the millions of refugees coming into Pakistan, but also the troops coming from India, the division of the army. So in that sense, we were thrown into the turmoil. And that experience shaped me. I was a young boy, but I was still seeing so much violence, so much hatred, so much movement around me, a world of chaos. And that also really created in me a sense of wanting to understand why people were behaving like they were behaving, almost irrationally. And I think that was the genesis of my own very strong desire for interfaith understanding and interfaith dialogue.
Dr. Ahmed, you have been celebrated across the globe as one of the top Muslim scholars. You have been named, you're among the 500 most prominent Muslims around the globe or in the world. BBC described you as one of the world's leading authorities on contemporary Islam. So I know the answer to this question, but I'd like to ask your opinion. What makes your scholarship, resonate so powerfully, and the respect around the globe? What's the reason?
Haribhai, I am constantly surprised at these accolades. I'm obviously pleased and gratified, but I'm surprised because there are many, many other greater scholars, more committed scholars. I know that I'm personally very involved and interested in everything I do. And I think the basis of my scholarship is a curiosity. I really want to understand the world around me. And as I said, from my childhood experiences, I'm born in one place. They've even changed the name of that place. Allahabad doesn't exist anymore. And it goes back to the Mughal Emperor Akbar. And my father named me after the Mughal Emperor Akbar. And then I was educated in Abbottabad, and I grew up in Abbottabad in the beautiful hills of North Pakistan. So again, all these factors really create in me that sense of wonder. People around me, different peoples. So you see my trajectory. Then my father was posted to the United Nations in Bangkok. So there I was meeting different people, different cultures. Now imagine in Pakistan, I'm surrounded by Muslims, mainly Muslims, Abrahamic.
Yeah.
Then in Bangkok, I'm surrounded by Thai people who are not only non-Abrahamic, but from Buddhist people, different culture, very gentle, very fine people. So even as a young boy, I was seeing differences in cultures and behavior, and how important it was for us to try to understand this. And as I grew older and I began to understand my religion, Islam, I realized how wise the sayings and the teachings of the Quran were, because the Quran keeps telling us to look around you, look at the different peoples, different cultures, different language we have, that is, God has created all of us. God could have made us all uniform in one way, but He's created the variety so that we may appreciate each other and wonder at each other and wonder at the glory and the greatness of God. So throughout my life, I've been very interested in that. And people have been very kind. You see, as you pointed out some of these accolades, I've been very privileged. I've been awarded, I think, unprecedented, the inaugural Gandhi Peace Award.
Yes, of course.
So, Pakistani getting the first Peace Award from the Gandhi Center in Washington was for me a very touching moment. And I did request then the Pakistan ambassador, who was my class fellow from FC College, Ashraf Qazi Jahangir. I requested him, I said, can you come and join us for that event? And I asked the director, Srimati Kamla, to ask the Indian ambassador. So they sent a very senior diplomat, and we had our Pakistan ambassador. So we had a little interfaith dialogue at the Gandhi Center where people talked of peace and friendship. And I think it was a very moving moment for me.
Dr. Ahmed, you are the author of more than 20 acclaimed books, including Journey into Islam, Journey into America, The Thistle and the Drone, and many others. Which of your books do you feel has had the most significant impact, and what message did you hope to share with the world through it?
Again, Haribhai, I am, as you know, you've been working with me and supporting me. I've written plays, I've written poetry, I've written articles, essays. I write regularly for the Friday Times, Daily Times, for you in the
Pakistan Link, of course, yes.
So, like I think most authors, I don't see so much of a structure or a pattern. I'm just writing or expressing myself. And if you were to ask me which is your favorite play or the most significant, I would answer that it's like asking a father or a mother, which is your favorite child, because you create something, and after that, really, in a sense, the product has its own life. It may do
Right.
well, it may not do well. And I'm sometimes surprised how a play of wine or a book of wine will appear in some other. There's a Chinese translation of my book, Journey into America, for example.
Yes, of course.
So, these things travel, they turn up somewhere. Some people are, they read it and they are influenced by it. It's not easy to predict, but one of the books I would certainly feel proud of is this series I did, the Brookings Quartet, 4 books based in fieldwork, which extended over literally years, most of the post 9/11 period. For almost 2-3 decades, I worked on these with a team of scholars and students, including my wife and Dr. Hoti, my daughter.
Yes.
We traveled, we interviewed people, and the findings were in 4 major books, 4 studies, all published by Brookings, which, as you know, is a leading think tank in Washington, D.C. So I think those books are of high standard, and even now they make an impact. They're read, they are cited, they're influencing other scholars. So I can take some pride that that was my contribution to the understanding of Islam in the modern world, in the post 9/11 world. That's something I can feel proud of, and feel that people who want to understand our cultures, and our cultures are very varied and different and complex.
Yes.
But I try to capture the contemporary scene through these studies, because all these studies are based in interviews, and all of them are based in scientific explanations, meaning in the context of their history, their culture. So it's not opinion. I'm not just saying I like these people or don't like these people. And the last one of these was Journey into Europe. So it was an exploration of the continent of Europe, and we went to the east and the west and the north and the south, and we interviewed the archbishops and the chief rabbis and the grand muftis and students and taxi drivers and imams, so the whole range of society right across Europe, and we produced that book.
And that was a very major undertaking, and I mean, it's done very well. How long did it take you to,
Well, the Europe project was stretched over several years, so I used to spend all my leave. So, for example, the summer months I'd spend in Europe traveling, very extensive, very hard, very tough journeys. And sometimes they were really tough journeys because you had to catch flights, sometimes miss flights, you had luggage, we had this full team, you had to try to get the right interview at the right time. And I'm also a scholar of history, so I was reading history. So again, in terms of history, I wanted to make sure that, for example, I was able to catch the exact spot in the Masjid-e-Qardoba, the mosque, the grand mosque of Abdul Rahman in Cordoba. It's a very impressive architecture. And to be able to sit and pray in that mihrab where Allama Iqbal sat and prayed. So I wanted to make those connections, where he wrote then Masjid-e-Qardoba in his famous poem.
Yeah, of course.
And then we visited the mayor of Cordoba, and my daughter was sitting opposite me, and she was making faces like this. And I said, what is wrong with her? And she was telling me right behind me was Iqbal's poem, Masjid-e-Qardoba, donated by the mayor of Lahore to the mayor of Cordoba.
Wow.
So, those beautiful connections that we have in our world. So through these journeys, I was able to also spot those and identify those.
On a personal note, Dr. Ahmed, I want to express my eternal gratitude for your invaluable contributions to our newspaper, Pakistan Link. For several decades, your articles in Pakistan Link have consistently been among the most read and most sought after pieces, deeply appreciated by our readers. What message would you like to share today with the loyal readers who have followed your work in Pakistan Link over the years?
Well, my message is, Arif, of gratitude. Gratitude to you, your excellent team, to your editor, Akhtar Farooqi, who is a man of great integrity and hard work and dedication, and to your readers, because as a writer, as a scholar, I can only again present what I have. And to be appreciated is, I think, the greatest compliment you can give a writer. So I really am grateful for all the encouragement. It is very encouraging. And I always tell my students, I say, look, this is an American paper. It's based in America. It's contributing to America's understanding of Muslim society, which is so needed right now. So you are playing really a service. Your service is both to Pakistan and to America, and you're playing the role of a true ambassador. So thank you.
Well, thank you, sir, for your support. And Pakistan Link, again, the value of Pakistan Link to the community is because of your writings and people like you who are very prominent scholars. I'm also profoundly grateful for the privilege and distinct honor of writing the forewords to two of your remarkable books, The Trials of Dara Shikoh and Gandhi and Jinnah Return Home. Now, in the foreword to The Trials of Dara Shikoh, I shared the story of our very first meeting, an account that remains close to my heart. And with your permission, I'd like to read an excerpt out of this foreword here today.
Please, I would enjoy that very much, because over the years I've thought about it and read about it, and you expressed it so beautifully. And it's both, I think, urgent because it captures a moment in time and moment in history, and also reveals our initial meeting and our subsequent friendship.
The following is an excerpt from the foreword to The Trial of Dara Shikoh, a play in 3 acts by Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, written by Arif Zafar Mansouri, publisher of Pakistan Link and Urdu Link. In this excerpt, Arif shares how a chance encounter at a trade show led to a lasting friendship with Ambassador Ahmed and the beginning of a personal journey into interfaith harmony.
I don't remember the exact date, but it was not too long after September 11th. I was in Las Vegas attending a trade show. As I was walking down the trade show floor, I happened to come upon a large crowd. In fact, there were so many more people than the area was designed to accommodate that the crush of the crowd had caused some of the exhibitors in the surrounding areas to give up on commerce and temporarily shut down their booths. Out of curiosity, I asked one of the exhibitors what in the world was going on. He told me that someone was giving a fascinating speech on the teachings of Islam which was causing the pedestrian traffic jam in the aisles. My first reaction was to turn around and run. I was totally flabbergasted and thought to myself that this guy must be a bona fide nut. Standing in the middle of a large mainstream American crowd at a huge trade show in Las Vegas so soon after September 11th, he's talking about Islam? I thought the speaker must either be very brave or not so bright, but either way, I couldn't resist my curiosity and soon joined the throngs of people heading off to hear him speak. I stood in the back of the large crowd and strained to hear the speaker talk about jihad, 9/11 and other sensitive and emotionally charged topics. His speech was riveting, and afterwards, as I waited patiently in a very long line of people for the opportunity to shake his hand, I talked to others who were waiting in line as well and discovered that many of them, like me, had not planned to attend this speech but were compelled to stay and listen to the words he spoke. Although I was familiar with his name and had read some of his work, this was my first meeting with Professor Akbar Ahmed and the beginning of our friendship, as well as my personal journey into the exploration of the topics related to interfaith harmony and peace.
So that, the speech that you gave that day, that was post 9/11, and that speech, gave a hope to our community in those dark times after 9/11. So your interfaith work, engaging world leaders, rabbis, bishops, imams, and citizens, and especially your dialogue with Judea Pearl, has set the standard for interfaith engagement. What lasting insights have you gained from these efforts?
A very good question. Very good question. First of all, you use the word hope. Arifbhai, for me, hope is one of the greatest features of human beings, of human societies. And if we look at our history, our combined history, especially if you study the great scholars and sages of our past, you will see that in the most difficult circumstances, they've had hope. In the Quran Sharif, there's a saying, "Na umidi kufr," which means that if you show lack of hope, it's like not believing, because you must have faith in something. You must have faith in God or yourself or your wife or whoever, but without that, you lose the purpose of living. So for me, interfaith is very, very important because it reflects the anxieties, the compassion, the love that we have in other people. And there have been sometimes very awkward situations, but I've not held back. I've plunged myself into meetings, and I've always found a very warm reception. I gave you the example of the Gandhi Center. I've been to synagogues, to churches, and straight after 9/11, we literally had a huge impact on America looking at the Muslim world. Because the two great, I felt in my life, the two great questions people had about Islam, about my culture and my religion, were number one, Islam is not a religion which promotes democracy. Islam rejects democracy. And number two, Islam is a religion of violence and of misogyny. So my aim was to challenge this, engage with it, and as a scholar to show the reality, not propaganda, but the reality. So that's why I spent a lot of my time in the 1990s, if you recall, doing the Jinnah project.
Right.
So I made a feature film with Christopher Lee, I made a documentary, I wrote a book, and I did a graphic novel, the first graphic novel in Pakistan. Because for me, Quaid-e-Azam, the founder of Pakistan, was in fact the quintessential Democrat. He represented democracy. So he represented the constitution, law and order, women's rights, human rights. So if I could make something and make a popular movie and an academic book and a documentary, which was based on historical evidence, historical analysis, it would be a contribution to the discussion about democracy in Islam. If I could show through these Brookings Quartet projects, because the books were accompanied by films, if I could show how Islam treated women and minorities and learning and scholarship, I could then take on the second point, which is what I did. And it's amazing if you go back to Islamic history, especially to what is called the golden age of Islam, from about the 8th century to the 12th, 13th century, you will see why Islam so spectacularly came on the world stage and the contributions it made. They really are staggering, Arif. You cannot, even today, you cannot, even my students are shocked when we go over it. And in each one of those points, you're refuting the fact that Islam does not treat women properly or minorities or rejects learning. Because everywhere, what Muslims are doing is the opposite. Where you show example after example. Women, it's incredible. Right from the start, you have Islamic women, starting with Hazrat Khadija and then on to Hazrat Fatima, Hazrat Aisha, Bibi Zainab. All these are remarkable women. As we see today, our wives, our daughters, they're doing an amazing job. They're very heroic, they're very brave. Some of them moving from Pakistan, coming to a different culture and society and integrating here and contributing here. That to me is the most heroic thing possible, but they're doing it. Something is sustaining them, and that is hope and faith. And then scholarship. Again, I'm going back to the golden age of Islam. The scholarship is staggering. Otherwise, it's really staggering. You have scholars who are mathematicians, astronomers, and they're poets. So Umar Khayyam is a great mathematician, and he's writing beautiful poetry, which in the 19th century, centuries later, will be translated by Edward Fitzgerald, and not a single copy will be sold in the first year. And then it becomes a bestseller in Europe. The poems of Umar Khayyam. Why was that? Because these scholars are humanists. They are Muslim, but they're also humanists. That is, they feel, they have compassion, they have faith, they have hope in the human experience, in human civilization. So to me, that's a very inspiring experience in itself.
Well, actually, through your work, see, I remember, in one of your speeches, you had mentioned in, the era right after 9/11, that the understanding of Islam in the Western world was very limited. Actually, I remember you telling, sort of a funny story that somebody approached you and they asked you, I understand, Islam, but what is this Muslim? And you told them that, Muslim is a piece of cloth, and I think you're asking about Muslim. And so from there to now, where there's a great understanding of Islam. So through your scholarly work, through your writings and your, teachings, I think, the world has learned, a tremendous deal about, the religion and the people. So I really feel that, that work that you've done has really had, far-reaching impact. But I would like to ask you, you mentioned some of these very successful, that very famous feature film Jinnah and the documentary Jinnah and other, so do you think that the rigorous scholarship and combining it with film and storytelling is the way to reach the broader audience?
I think so, Arifbhai, because again, remember, everything I'm doing in life is not pre-planned, and sometimes I make the mistake of having more passion than having more sense. I just jump in because I think it must be done. I think that's one habit that we in the CSP cadre learned or did not learn from our mistakes. So you do it because it must be done, or it will not be done. Similarly with the Jinnah film, I knew that people had made several attempts before I jumped in. So as soon as I came to Cambridge as the Iqbal Fellow, the Iqbal Chair, Pakistan Studies, I began to plan for the film, and I began to write a first draft of a script, and I worked on it, and I began to talk to different directors to film it with me. And I was determined to do something. Now, my problem was I had no experience. That's why I made many mistakes. But in the end, I know that if you even complete a film, it's a huge achievement. I know how difficult it is. So it was a very, very costly in terms of my health, my personal finances, everything was ruined. And I must give credit to my wife who stood by me, because it was a real pressure on me economically and financially, but we were there and they were prepared to make sacrifices. My friends, my close friends, the cast and crew, Christopher Lee, especially the main actor, he was amazing. He said, like Quaid-e-Azam made Pakistan, I will not give up till we make the film. He literally, that was the spirit.
That's amazing.
That was the spirit. Even now in his interviews, he says, my best film was the Jinnah film. He says it, my best role was that of
That was really a great film, and
No, you see, a professional filmmaker could have made a better film, perhaps, but it was an act of, I would think, passion more than anything else. And we did that, and then I made a documentary. I was the executive producer and worked on the script, and that had interviews of people who had met Quaid-e-Azam, who had lived at the time when he was alive. So they were giving contemporary perspectives of Quaid-e-Azam. It's a very powerful film. Documentary, and again that was shown on British screens. And then of course I have the Jinnah book, which I got some very good blurbs from top historians, and a graphic novel. So these 4 projects in the 1990s meant that decade for me was a decade focused on Quaid-e-Azam, and that was my dedication to the founder of Pakistan, because it started off by mentioning I come from a place called Allahabad. I was just born there, and I don't really know anything about it. But I do know that for me, Pakistan gave me one of the top jobs. It was the civil service of Pakistan. It gave me a beautiful wife, and a very loyal and faithful wife, and gave me a life and a career. So what more could I have asked? And that was what Pakistan means for me, and therefore I feel very passionately about it.
You mentioned, you served, in really high positions in diplomatic, the foreign services. So, as Pakistan's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland, you represented our nation at the highest levels of diplomacy. What lasting lesson from those years of diplomacy continue to guide you today?
I think the biggest lesson I learned was, and I think this is something that our diplomats, I hope, have learned through their own careers, that diplomats, civil servants at that level are also human. The human-to-human contact is very, very important. We forget that. We normally have briefs, and you just stick to briefs. Like you're an automaton, you're a robot. They don't open up. And you'll see some of the greatest achievements in history have been on a personal level. You may recall that when Pakistan lost the 71 war to India, there were troops in Indian camps, prison camps, and Prime Minister Bhutto and Indira Gandhi met in Simla, and the talks were not going well. And the talks had collapsed. And that evening, the staff of Bhutto came and said, well, that's it, sir. You haven't achieved anything. You have to leave in the morning. And apparently, there's the story that Bhutto just walked across. They were staying in the same hotel, to Indira Gandhi's room, knocked on the door. And for the next 2 hours, they had a one-to-one, face-to-face meeting. And when he came out, he had got the prisoners for Pakistan. So again, a lot depends on personal chemistry. I think that's the biggest lesson that I learned.
Dr. Ahmed, you have been honored at the highest levels from Pakistan's Sitara Imtiaz and Tamgha Imtiaz to international recognitions like the Sir Percy Sykes Medal. You mentioned the Gandhi Memorial Center Peace Award, the Professor of the Year Award in DC, and many, many more. Do you see these distinctions as personal honors or as recognition of Pakistan and the Muslim world you so often represent?
When I was much younger, these awards thrilled me because you're younger, you're competing.
Yes, of course.
I was educated in a boarding school in Ahmedabad, where you're competing all the time with your class fellows. And so if you come first in a race, you feel very proud. So these did thrill me. When I was Forman Christian College, I got the gold medal for coming first in history and English, both subjects. So I felt really proud. But as you grow older, you are grateful. And I am extremely grateful, and you feel a great sense of satisfaction. But beyond that, the work matters. If you're able to contribute something which is substantial, and people respond to that, and one of the great pleasures of being in academia is that you write something, you make a comment, and you have someone in Japan or someone in China responding and saying, I read your paper, I read your book, and I was very much influenced. I have a lot of younger people writing to me, especially women in the Muslim world, and saying, would you write the foreword to my book? Would you be my external examiner for my thesis? Because I've been inspired by your work. And that for me is very important. That does happen. Frequently it happens. There are many, many examples of women. I give them full marks because they're living in a patriarchal society. It's not easy to be educated, and yet they're determined to get education and to prove themselves through their work. And they may have read my work, and they may have been inspired by it. And for me, then that becomes a great honor. That for me is a bigger honor than a formal recognition.
Looking back at your extraordinary journey as a scholar, diplomat, author, and filmmaker, what do you most hope your legacy will be, and how would you like future generations to remember Dr. Akbar Ahmed?
I would like people to remember that I was an ordinary Muslim who lived an ordinary life in extraordinary times, and I lived it to the best of my conscience. Very difficult times. So sometimes I had to make difficult decisions. Sometimes I suffered in our service, in the civil service of Pakistan, which was the elite service of Pakistan. When you were punished by the bosses who didn't like what you were doing or wanted to show their displeasure, they would appoint you OSD. OSD meant Officer on Special Duty, but it meant you had no duty.
Oh, is that right?
It's a very English way of punishing the officials. So same thing carried on with Pakistan. So I've been OSD when the government didn't approve what I was doing. But with pride, I can say I continued, and I did not compromise my conscience or my integrity. And that for me, I think, is the biggest tribute you can pay me. That maybe I could have been a better human being, maybe I could have been a better Muslim, but I did my best to the best of my conscience.
Like, I'm holding a copy of Living Islam, which was a 6-part series, telecast by BBC in 1993, which was, when, the understanding of Islam was not that great. And so you hosted this program, or, this was, one of the major turnaround for Muslims in the Western world. I'd like you to please tell us about this Living Islam.
Well, Arba, you asked about what achievements or what things I'm proud of, and I think this is one of the things that I'm really proud of, because first of all, it was a real struggle to make a 6-part series on the BBC, which meant it was right in the mainstream, and they would broadcast it at prime time on the BBC. And when it came out, every newspaper, Guardian, Times, would give it the top rating, very good reviews. And I was privileged to give a set of this, the set you're holding, to Prince Charles. He was very interested in Islam. So he saw this. And I know because in his historic speech, seminal speech at Oxford on Islam and the West, and I was present there, I was sitting in the front row of the Sheldonian Theatre of Oxford. very famous old theater. He gave a brilliant speech.
Mhm.
He had 3 quotations from Living Islam. 3 quotations.
Hmm.
One of them was that when you speak from the mouth, it goes to the mouth. It goes to the ears, but if you speak from the heart, it goes to the heart. So when you speak, you must be able
That's
to
very
speak from
profound.
the heart to the heart. Beautiful,
Mhm.
beautiful. Then he used this phrase, from Samarkand to Stornoway. Stornoway is a
Mhm.
small Scottish island.
Mhm.
I'd gone there to interview some Pakistanis settled there. And I had
Mhm.
made this observation. Now remember this is 93,
Mhm.
because the BBC published this book, Living Islam, with the series, that Muslims are now global. So
Mhm.
they were spread from Samarkand to Stornoway, west of Scotland to the center of Central Asia.
Mhm.
It was really a true blend. You had to look at Islam now as a global society, as a global religion, which was different to looking at it as a regional religion like Pakistani religion or Bangladesh religion. So these were some of the observations. And I can say that once this was over, I had a lot of people from Nigeria and Malaysia and so on very much identifying with this
Mhm.
and saying to me, because it was shown in England, it had a huge impact. A lot of Muslims coming up to me and saying, we really feel proud after seeing this and give us a sense of identity, who we are, and that we contributed to culture. Because I had a whole part, one entire part on the golden age of Islam, the golden period of Andalusia and the Mughals and the Isfahan, the architecture, the Persians, beautiful culture, the Turk, the Ottomans and their mosques. So it had an impact which was, I would say, extraordinary, because if you remember, that's the time of the first Gulf War.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a lot of
course.
Islamophobia in the air. And the press wasn't very kind to Muslims. So there was constant stuff about terrorism and Muslims are backward, Muslims are misogynist, and so on. So it came at a very opportune time. So my lesson is to go back. Media is crucial, scholarship is crucial, and Muslims must tell their story. Because if they don't tell their stories, other people will tell their stories. That is why, Arif, I salute you, because
Thank
you're
you very
telling
much.
our story and you're giving us a chance to tell our stories. So I salute you and I pray for you.
Thank you so much, and I'm really thankful to you. For giving me the gift of this book and videotapes. I truly appreciate it.
Arif, let
Thank you
me
so
present
much.
this to you.
It's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Living Islam was based on a book that you wrote. Tell us about that book.
Yes, it's a very interesting story, because Discovering Islam was written by me over the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
I had come to Princeton with Zinat, my wife, to the Institute for Advanced Study.
Mhm.
I was the second Pakistani after Abdul Salam, who got the Nobel Prize. And I was very honored to be there. It was the Institute of Einstein and these great names. And I was an anthropologist. That was my field. But my father, who was very ill, I didn't know how ill he was. He was in Karachi and he was very ill. And he was constantly saying, I'm going to come and stay with you in Princeton and so on. We were very close. And he would tell me, you must write on Islam. And I would tell him, because he came from a very religious background. So I would say, I'm not a religious scholar. I don't know anything about Islam, and I cannot write about Islam because I have integrity as a scholar. I must write in my field, which is anthropology. And I was within my field, I was quite well known. And my mother would say that every time I wrote a letter to them in Karachi, he would take my letter and be very proud of it. And when guests came, he wasn't well, so he would sit up in bed and they would say, what is this? And he would say, Dekho, mera beta, my son, is going to write a book on Islam. So he was very committed to that. And that idea translated to me. So when I rang him and I was asking my mother, I said, I want to talk to my father. And she said, he's just passed away.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that.
So that came as a big shock. This was in Princeton. So I remember going to my office and I remember standing there and a friend of mine, a colleague came and said, what are you doing? And I said, like this, as I was in a daze, I said, I'm writing a book on Islam. And my colleague said, but you're not a scholar of Islam. I said, I'm going to become a scholar of Islam.
Wow.
So from 1980 onwards, I traveled in the Muslim world. I met people, I read on Islam. And at the end of that decade, I wrote Living Islam, Living Islam, which became, it had literally 150 reviews, very good reviews from The Economist and everywhere, very good reviews. And the BBC then made a film based on Living Islam.
Right.
And when I came to America, 9/11 happened. Within a few days, I was invited to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And she held up a book called Islam Today, which I wrote, which is based on Living Islam. So you see the link?
Right.
So my father's wish that I write on Islam to Islam Today, which was a book that Oprah was showing to the camera and telling the people, saying that this is the best book to read on Islam, because everyone wanted to know about Islam. And she said it's so popular that you can't get a single copy in Chicago. So I joked with her. I said, Oprah, the reason you can't get it in Chicago is because no one knows this book. No one knows the author. I'm totally unknown. I don't think you joke like that with Oprah because she's so big. You see, they assume anyone Oprah must be someone. But I meant it because it was an unknown book. I was unknown. I'd just come to America. So you can see how the links provide you a link which is beyond us as human beings to understand. So many things happen, like our meeting. They happen, and we can't really explain it or understand it, except marvel at this phenomena of life on this planet as creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That was a very beautiful and very touching story. I'm so glad you shared that story with us. What are some of the projects that you're working on, and what are your future plans?
I have, Arifbhai, two big projects. One is autobiography, which I'm putting together. And one is a very big project, which I'm working on with Frankie Martin and Dr. Hoti, in which it's very ambitious, and I've jumped into it. But I'm looking at world history and looking at scholars from across the planet and identifying those individuals in Islamic culture, in Hindu culture, and Chinese culture who promoted faith, love, compassion, and understanding. And it struck me, this is something that struck me, that's why I started this project. It's a very big project. What struck me was that throughout history, from the time of Socrates, there were individuals who reached out and embraced the world. And they said that we are part of something much bigger, a bigger universe. And you must love one another. And then I said, wait a minute, I've heard this before. I heard Jesus saying it. I've heard our Rasul Pak Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saying this again and again. He is Rahmatul Alameen.
Of course.
He's not only Rahmat for the Muslims, he's
yeah.
Rahmatul Alameen. Allah Ta'ala is
the entire world.
Allah Ta'ala He's of all the universes. Rabbal Alameen.
So
wait a minute, what is going on? They're not saying we are Muslim deities only. They're saying we're global. And then I began to read more and more into world history, and I was coming across individuals of this caliber who were reaching out and sometimes getting in trouble because everyone doesn't like this idea. Everyone says you must think in terms of the Radri, your own community, your own ethnicity, your own religion. And sometimes they get angry and take action. And you'll see many of them, Jesus Christ. Jesus was crucified.
Right.
He was put up on a cross and crucified. And what was his reaction? He said, forgive them for they know not what they do. I mean, think of it, think of the agony an individual, you or me, is suffering in that. So how would you respond? You may be angry, you may be wanting to take revenge. He's saying, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. He didn't even add, he didn't even say that they're idiots for what they're doing. Because I can punish them. I have the divine backing me. But he didn't. He said, forgive them, but they don't know what they're doing. They're like children. So I think that project for me became a very important, but I'm still in the process of finishing it. And then I went right through and up to our own times, and suddenly I realized, my God, in our part of the world, what is Quaid-e-Azam saying? Quaid-e-Azam never said, hate the Hindus, hate the Sikhs.
Yeah, that's right.
His first great speech in the Constituent Assembly, he says, Hindus are free to go to their temples, Muslims are free to go to their mosques. Again and again, he's emphasizing it. Why? Because he is going back to early Islam, the concept of the universe as unified. all the great Muslim figures, from the Prophet's time to Hazrat Ali, right through history, and into Rumi and Ibn Arabi and later Ghazali and so on. They're all talking of the unity of existence and how we must look at the world as a unity, because God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created all of mankind and womankind. So this is the project I'm doing, and I'm finding it fascinating, and I'm learning so much. Now, for example, we just did something which you very kindly published in the Pakistan link on Rabindranath Tagore.
Right.
And a lot of people read it and they were just astounded. Yesterday, I met our dean, former dean at the American University, and he said that's one of the best articles I read from your Pakistan link.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's on Tagore. He said, I knew nothing about Tagore. And I said, he was the first Asian to get a Nobel Prize, and you didn't know about him. You see the service we are doing. So
of course,
it's not a Muslim promoting a Muslim with a Muslim paper. You are writing about Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Hindu philosopher, writer, writing about the universe, but also promoting peace. So this is the project I'm doing right now, and I hope, inshallah, to finish it in the next year or so.
I'd like to ask you, you are looked upon as a role model by Pakistani Americans and Muslims worldwide. What message or advice would you give to our community, and especially the young people in our diaspora who aspire to follow your path as scholars, diplomats, and bridge builders?
Well, again, I am grateful that people think of me as a role model. I don't think of myself as a role model. I just carry on and doing what I have to do as best, according to the best conscience I have. My advice would be, because I've had some experience in different parts of the world, my experience tells me that the young generation must be proud of who they are. They must be proud of their identity. They must feel a sense of confidence. They represent one of the most glorious cultures of world history. Literally, it's a world culture. And I'm sorry to say that they're losing their sense of confidence, and they are not so aware of the past. So without history, they are nothing, because if you don't know your past, you don't know your future, you don't know where you're going. So I would want them to read. I would want them to understand where they're coming from, so that they have a clearer idea of where they're going. And America is a marvelous society, Arba. If you see the Scots came, the Irish came, the Italians came, and they all brought their own cultures here. And they contributed to this great country that is America. So it's like a feast on the table, and everyone's bringing their dish. So Pakistanis who are coming from their areas must come and bring their feast and their dishes to this culture and contribute to it. So this is my advice to the young generation. More confidence, more understanding of the past, and more sharing with people who are not like them.
Dr. Ahmed, it's truly been an honor to host you. Your wisdom and your journey really shows that with the dialogue and with the scholarship and compassion, you can bridge and across these cultures and faiths. Really grateful for sharing your time and your wisdom and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Arba. Thank you very much. It's such an honor always to be working with you, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll do other things together, so we'll continue to contribute. Thank you, Arba.
Thank you very much. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us today. Please keep watching The Mansoori Show. Keep reading our newspapers, Pakistan Link and Urdu Link. Keep sending us your feedback, your comments at the address on your screen. And above all, please stay connected with Pakistan. Till we meet again, Khuda Hafiz.
Parents, show your love with Tahir Halal Kids Multivitamin Gummies, made in the USA and certified halal. Delicious and packed with essential vitamins, these gummies keep your little ones healthy, happy, and full of energy. No fuss, just fun, because good health should taste great. Tahir Halal. Love, nutrition, and care in every bite.
ताहिर प्रोडक्ट्स आपके खानदान की सेहत के लिए बेहतरीन हलाल विटामिन्स और सप्लीमेंट्स, खालिस, मियारी, और फ़ख्र के साथ अमेरिका में तैयार करदा।
Kaba Fusion is a pharmacist-owned, patient-focused team of professionals with over 30 years' experience providing intravenous medication to patients in the comfort of their own home. Founded by Dr. Sohail Masood, Kaba Fusion has 7 state-of-the-art pharmacies located across the country. Visit us at kabafusion.com to learn more about the benefits of in-home infusion therapy.